Ice and welcome. Seekers of history and guardians of legend, you have entered a journey that transcends time itself, a journey into the sacred heart of Japan, where myth and reality weave together to form the roots of a nation. Here, in the cradle of the Yamato, we stand at the dawn of emperors, where gods once walked alongside mortals and destiny carved its path upon the earth. This is no ordinary tale. It is the living spirit of Japan's beginning, carried in whispers of the wind, the roar of oceans, and the silent watch of mountains. In this story, emperors are not mere rulers, but divine bridges between heaven and earth. Their rise was not forged in silence, but in chaos, war, love, betrayal, and the eternal pursuit of harmony. As you watch, you will walk beside warriors and priests, queens and emperors, gods and mortals. Each chapter will draw you deeper into the soul of Yamato, a story written in blood, honor, and the eternal light of the rising sun. Prepare yourself, for you are about to witness the first sparks of an empire, the birth of Yamato, the dawn of the emperor. Before the rising sun bathed the world in light, Japan was a land of storms, gods, and forgotten dreams. But from the ashes of chaos, one destiny arose, to forge an empire that would never die. This is the dawn of the emperor, and his story begins now. Subscribe for more history, like and comment. If you believe history should never be forgotten, and share to spark conversation about the lessons we must learn from the past. This is not myth, this is history, and it begins here. Kano, jites before there was earth, sky, or sea, there was only chaos, a formless void without shape, without sound, without light. Time itself had not yet begun. The cosmos swirled endlessly, heavy and light, bright and dark, forever entangled. From this eternal storm, the first seeds of existence began to stir. The heavens rose upward, pure and weightless, while the heavier matter sank downward, forming the foundation of what would one day be the earth. Between them stretched a vast expanse, the bridge between realms. It was in this silence that the first divine forces awakened. They were not yet gods in flesh or form, but spirits of creation, eternal and nameless, guiding the flow of chaos into order. From the drifting vapors came the primordial Kami, the high god of the center of heaven, and his companions. Silent, unseen, they watched as balance emerged from disorder. But harmony was fragile. Darkness still lingered, threatening to consume light, and silence battled with the echoes of storm. The cosmos trembled. The Kami, though hidden, willed the elements into motion. Fire, water, earth, and wind struggled violently, shaping the first outlines of the islands. The void was no longer empty. It was a womb of creation, preparing for the gods who would shape destiny. Yet within the shadows, there remained fear, for where there is creation, there must also be destruction. The balance was delicate, and chaos was never truly gone. In this beginning, the seed of Yamato was sown. Not yet a nation, not yet a people, but a whisper of destiny waiting to awaken. The emperor's story had not yet begun, but already the path of divine rule was written among the stars. And so, from the eternal void, Japan was conceived, not by chance, but by the will of the cosmos itself, pried from the swirling void. The first beings of order began to take shape. These were the Kotoamatsukami, the separate heavenly deities, who appeared spontaneously in the highest heavens. They had no parents, no form of flesh. They were eternal principles given voice. Silent, radiant, and untouchable, they watched from above, one by one. Others followed. The 7 generations of Kami arose, pairs of deities who embodied balance, male and female, light and dark, sky, and earth. They were born not as mortals are, but as embodiments of the universe itself. Each represented a fragment of reality, a thread in the great tapestry of creation. The heavens stirred with life, but the earth below remained unformed. Oceans were endless and chaotic. Lands had not yet solidified, and storms raged across the void. The gods gazed downward and knew that their work was unfinished. Thus began the eternal task, to give shape to the shapeless, to make a dwelling place for humankind who would one day walk between heaven and earth. The divine court and the kami waited for the chosen pair who would descend and bring order to the seas. The cosmos was no longer silent. It whispered with voices, with prayers, with the stirring of divine purpose. Ready for its creators, canned among the generations of deities. One pair stood apart, Izanagi, he who invites, and Izanami, she who invites. Beautiful, youthful, and radiant with divine power, they were chosen by the elder kami to complete creation. The heavenly deities placed in their hands a sacred gift, the Ame no Nuboko, the jeweled spear of heaven. With it, they were to stir the swirling seas and solidify the land. Obedient to their divine mission, Izanagi and Izanami descended to the floating bridge of heaven, a radiant arc stretching between. Standing together, they lowered the jeweled spear into the endless ocean below. As they stirred the brine, droplets fell from its tip, hardening into the first island, Onogoroshima, the self-formed island. Joyful, the two deities descended and built a pillar upon the land, circling it in opposite directions. When they met, they performed the first sacred union, a marriage that symbolized the bond of heaven and earth. From their embrace, new islands were born, and Japan's land began to take shape. The world had form, the seas had borders, and the age of chaos was fading. Yet the passion of creation carried both promise and danger. Since creation brought joy, but also sorrow. From their union, Izanagi and Izanami gave birth to many islands and gods. But when Izanami bore the god of fire, Kagutsuchi, flames consumed her body. Screams echoed across heaven and earth as she fell, mortally wounded. In agony, Izanagi wept over his beloved, his tears creating more deities of grief and sorrow. Despite his power, he could not save her. Izanami descended into Yomi, the land of the dead. Izanagi, heartbroken, could not bear to lose her and journeyed into the shadowed realm to retrieve her soul. But Yomi was a land of corruption, and when he found Izanami, her body had already decayed into a corpse of filth and worms. Horrified, Izanagi fled. Rage burned in Izanami's eyes as she chased him to the surface, furious that he had seen her shame. At the border between worlds, Izanagi sealed the entrance with a boulder, cutting off the dead from the living forever. From that day, death was bound to life, and the world of the living was never again free from shadow. The balance of creation had been bought with tragedy. Collate from the union of Izanagi and Izanami's final acts came 3 children who would shape Japan forever. When Izanagi purified himself after escaping Yomi, he washed his face in a sacred river. From his left eye emerged Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess. From his right eye came Tsukuyomi, the moon god. From his nose arose Susanoo, the tempestuous storm god. Together, they were the divine siblings who embodied light, time, and chaos. Amaterasu shone brighter than all others, her radiance illuminating heaven and earth. Izanagi, proud, entrusted her with rule over the high plane of heaven. Her warmth brought life, her light gave order, and her beauty inspired reverence among gods and mortals alike. But harmony was fragile. Tsukuyomi grew distant, cold as the moon. Susanoo, wild and furious, became a storm that threatened to tear the world apart. Yet in Amaterasu's presence, the heavens held their balance, for her light was the heart of Yamato itself. Thus began the age of divine rivalry, the sun, moon, and storm, whose quarrels would echo into the destiny of emperors. Though born of divine purity, Susanoo was a god of storms and rage. His heart was wild, his spirit untamed. While Amaterasu ruled with light, Susanoo brought thunder and chaos. He lashed out at the seas, raising tidal waves, and howled across the mountains, shaking the earth. The gods grew weary of his fury. Izanagi cast him out, but Susanoo's anger was unrelenting. Before his exile, he ascended to Amaterasu's palace in the heavens, demanding recognition. His arrival shook the sky. Storms raged, lightning cracked, and the heavens trembled. Amaterasu confronted him, radiant and calm. But Susanoo, blinded by pride, unleashed havoc. He tore up rice fields, hurled a flayed horse into the weaving hall of the sun goddess, and terrified the handmaidens of heaven. Overcome with grief and shame, Amaterasu retreated into the heavenly cave, hiding her light from the world. Darkness consumed the heavens and earth, and chaos reigned. The gods panicked. Without the sun, the world was doomed. Thus began the divine crisis, when storm overpowered light, and the balance of creation hung by a thread. Ancestry darkness brooded over the heavens after Amaterasu sealed herself within the cave. Thunder walked on iron feet across the sky, and seas heaved like beasts in chains. The gods gathered, fearful and ashamed. To restore balance, they confronted Susanoo, whose fury had shattered the peace. He stood defiant, a cliff of storm against their pleas. Yet even he felt the chill of a sunless world. When Amaterasu finally emerged to hear their counsel, she demanded proof of Susanoo's intent. Thus began the heavenly contest, a divine trial to purify pride and test truth. Upon the sky river, the siblings set their vows. From Susanoo's sword, Amaterasu birthed 3 radiant goddesses, each a strand of sunlight braided into form. From Amaterasu's treasured jewels, Susanoo birthed 5 gods, sparks of storm tempered by grace. Each side claimed their offspring as proof of purity. Voices rose, oaths tangled. But the truth was not counted by numbers. It lived in conduct. Susanoo, shouting triumph, forgot humility. He tore at the winds, uprooted sacred trees, and bellowed so loud the constellations shuddered. Amaterasu, wounded again, hid her light within her sleeve, and the horizon dimmed. The elder kami intervened. Wisdom demanded more than rivalry. It required a right to mend the world. They built a platform of cedar and jade, placed mirrors and jewels upon it, and called for Uzume, the goddess of revelry, to lead a dance that could draw laughter even from sorrow. Yet before the dance, the gods commanded Susanoo to atone or be cast into exile forever. Susanoo bowed at last. He cleansed himself in the sky river, the storm briefly gentle like rain on rice shoots. The gods bound his breath with vows of restraint. The contest would end not in triumph, but in lesson. A sovereign's strength is bound to self-mastery. The world held its breath as drums began to beat, and far away, inside the cave's shadow where hope thinned, a sliver of curiosity warmed in the sun goddess's heart. Pipises kohid. The cave stone mouth quivered with laughter as Uzume danced, wild, clever, sacred. She stamped patterns into the heaven floor, while the mirror flashed like sunrise caught in water. Amaterasu, intrigued, peered out. The gods raised the mirror, and light rushed back into the world. With the sun restored and Susanoo sent to wander and learn, harmony returned to the high plane of heaven. Yet a kingdom waited below. Misty islands stitched by currents, mountains like folded fans, valleys where rice would one day sing. Amaterasu looked upon the earth and knew the time had come to plant order in its soil. She called her grandson Mikoto, a prince of queer gaze and even temper, born from the braided peace of the contest. To him she entrusted a charge that would bind heaven and earth with an unbroken thread. The gods readied the regalia, emblems of divine authority. A mirror polished like still dawn, a string of Magatama jewels, the curve of moon cradling tide, and a sword, its edge the memory of storms subdued. With these symbols, Ninigi would carry the heavenly mandate to rule with balance, light with justice, mercy with strength. On a terrace of cloud, Amaterasu placed her hand upon his shoulder. "Go with my light," she said. "Let your rule be like morning, gentle, certain, returning." The winds bowed. The Yata Garasu, a three-legged crow, wheeled above as omen and guide. Heavenly retainers, stalwart Ame no Koyane, wise Futudama, and others, assembled to accompany the descent. The sky opened like a gate. Pillars of sunlight fell to the horizon, and Ninigi stepped upon them as if upon a staircase of radiance. Clouds unfurled into bridges, cranes circled. The sea laid itself flat like a mirror to greet him. As he neared the earth, mountains bloomed with cedar and camellia, and river mists parted, revealing the coasts of Takachiho in Kyushu, a place chosen by the gods. When at last his feet met the grass, a hush moved through the land. Even stones listened. Ninigi raised the mirror and the wind sighed, remembering. He lifted the jewels and streams brightened. He held the sword and storms sheathed their lightning. The heavenly retinue placed standards in the soil. A small shrine was raised at the foothill, a promise that governance would be a ritual before it was a rule. Night came gentle, with stars pricked like needles in indigo cloth. The three-legged crow settled upon a pine, watching, patient. Ninigi looked east, where future roads would thread forests and fields, and he spoke a vow that the line begun here would be a river through centuries, feeding the heart of Yamato. Power that endures is not a shout. It is a ceremony repeated until it becomes the world's heartbeat. Upon arriving in Takacho, Ninigi enshrined the three sacred treasures not merely as trophies, but as covenants. Each relic held a memory. The mirror remembered laughter coaxing light from hiding. The jewels remembered pledge and kinship. The sword remembered a storm-learning restraint. At dawn, he placed the mirror upon a cedar stand, its rim bound with woven grass. He faced it not to see himself, but to see the charge reflected. The people yet to be born, the fields not yet planted, the disputes not yet resolved. Let this teach rulers to reflect, he proclaimed, to measure their words by the world they shape. At noon, he lifted the curve of Magatama jewels, emerald and amber glimmering like river pools. Strung together, they formed a chain of trust. He spoke, "Let this remind us that authority is many hearts linked, clan to clan, parent to child, heaven to earth." At dusk, he unsheathed the sword. The blade caught the last light like a horizon. He felt the old thunder running along its spine and bowed. "Let this steel be last," he said. "May we govern so that drawing it is rare and sheathing it swift." Messengers traveled the valleys bearing rice seed and ritual words. Local chieftains came to witness. Some knelt readily, soothed by the order and the promise of shared harvests. Others hesitated, fearing that the heaven-born would demand what earth could not give. Ninigi welcomed them to the shrine, offered salt and sake, and let them look into the mirror, so they might see themselves as partners in the covenant, Wadifoi, not subjects to a foreign will. So began the ethic of Yamato, light that listens, bonds that bind, strength that protects. The regalia would pass from hand to hand like a river passes through a valley, carving but also feeding. and somewhere on a path not yet walked, a descendant would carry them eastward. Following a crow into history, generations turned like pages in a lacquered book. From Ninigi's line was born Hikohohodemi, then his son, and onward until a prince named Kamuyamato Iweribiko, known to posterity as Emperor Jimmu. He was not yet emperor, only a leader with eyes that saw farther than horizons. In dreams, a three-legged crow traced paths across a pale map of mountains and rivers. In waking hours, he felt the pull of the east, where the sun climbs. A throne should face its source, he said, for a realm guided by dawn forgets neither where light begins nor how it returns. The western lands were rich but divided. Tribes guarded valleys like wolves guarding dens. Jimmu listened more than he spoke. He walked fields with farmers, tested hunting bows with youths, and knelt at altars older than memory. When he looked into the ceremonial mirror inherited from the line of heaven, he did not see his face. For Chariobid, he saw a road braided from duty and mercy, edged by risk. At a council fire, elders spoke of the Naka River, the sea lanes, and the distant Yamato Basin, a bowl of fertile land ringed by mountains, a natural heart for a nation. Yet the route would be perilous. Marsh spirits ensnared travelers. Rival lords would not yield. Jimmu touched the Magatama at his chest and answered, "We will not seize the east. We will join it." That night, the Yata Garasu visited. Its wings blacker than midnight, its eyes the color of embers, it perched upon a spear and bowed. Jimmu understood. The omen of his ancestor had come to guide him. At dawn, he gathered his brothers and companions, archers who could thread an arrow between reeds. He pitched his brothers and companions, boatmen who read tides like scripture, priestesses who carried fire in bronze dishes. They swore an oath by the sword, to draw it only when words failed, to shield the weak, to carry the mirror where judgment was needed. The flotilla slipped along coastlines, hugging coves, like commas in a long sentence, where they landed. Jimmu offered salt and song before speaking of shared harvests and roads that would connect shrine to shrine. Some chiefs clasped his hands, others tested him with skirmishes, the air quick with arrows. Jimmu Espo spoke firm and fair. Victory bent like bamboo, supple, not brittle. On a hill overlooking mist-laced fields, Jimmu watched the sunrise pour molten gold into the world. The crow alighted upon a pine beside him. He felt the line from Amaterasu to Ninigi to himself. Tight, humming, alive. The vision was no longer a whisper. It was a direction carved by light. "To Yamato," he said softly. "Not to conquer, to kindle." The east answered with a breeze that smelled of new rice, and the road, long, hard, luminous, began. The tide turned its slow shoulder to the shore, as Jimmu's flotilla pushed off, hulls whispering across the foam. Oars dipped in unison, standards caught the dawn. Behind them, mountains kept their counsel. Before them, the long curve of coast and river mouths unspooled, like a sentence not yet finished. Jimmu stood at the prow, bow unstrung across his back, the Magatama cool against his chest. Above, the Yata Garasu circled, black punctuation in a pale sky. They sailed by day and camped in coves by night. At each landing, rites came first. Salt scattered to the sea, sake poured to the shore, songs braided with the wind. Elders among the crew, the priestess Isuzu, the counselor Koyane, kept the calendar of auspicious days, balancing haste with harmony. Fisherfolk approached with gifts of kelp and shells. In return, Jimmu offered iron tools and counsel on sharing weirs when salmon ran. Alliances were seeds planted in brackish sand. Not every shore welcomed them. At the mouth of a river choked by reeds, Warriors with lacquered armor watched from the shallows, spears held like stern reeds of their own. Their chieftain, Nagaweso, ruled a marshland of fog and rumor. He distrusted the eastward talk, the mirror-guided way. Words met words, and skittered away like minnows. Only after the priestess drew a circle in the mud and called on the river Kami did the tension soften. A feast followed, eel roasted over alder coals, stories traded for stories. Jimmu learned the currents and the hidden paths through muck and willow. In return, he left a promise. Roads will one day bind reed to cedar, coast to hill. Storms tested them. Once, black squalls boiled over the horizon so swiftly that even seasoned boatmen paled. They beached the vessels and lashed them to pines. Wind flattened the world. Rain drummed like 10,000 fingers. Jimmu moved among his people, quieting fear with task and touch, counting ropes, steadying fires, correcting knots. Fear, he knew, swells in idle hands. By dawn, the storm had passed. They ate rice porridge and laughed at the way the crow had slept, sulking. Under a basket, the land changed. Cliffs leaned closer. Rivers grew stronger. The scent of cedar replaced sea salt. Scouts returned with news. Beyond a saddle of hills lay valleys where cranes stalked flooded paddies. The path to Yamato was no longer a dream. It was a ridgeline, a ford, a set of tracks pressed into damp soil. At twilight on the 47th camp, Jimmu climbed a bluff and watched the horizon burn down to embers. He thought of Ninigi on a stair of light, of Amaterasu's mirror, of Suzanu's sword once sheathed by restraint. The journey eastward was not conquest. It was alignment, of coast with river, of shrine with field, of people with the path of the sun. He slept with the bow beneath his palm, not as a weapon, but as a vow. The first true test came where river met stone, the Uda country, whose shrines were old as fog, and whose lords claimed protection from spirits no one dared name aloud. The local war chief, Yukashi, wore antler crests and spoke for the mountain kami, as if they were his kin. He greeted Jimmu with gifts and a smile that showed too many teeth. Feast, then ambush, the oldest tactic under the oldest sky. Drums shifted to a battle rhythm. Torches winked from thickets. A gate closed behind the guests. But Jimmu had read the cadence of deceit in the tilt of Yukashi's head. Before the trap sprang, he rose and set down the mirror upon the mat. "Let every vow be spoken before light," he said. In that bright circle, lies curdled like milk. Yukashi's men wavered, the gatekeeper's hands shook, the war chief struck first, and the courtyard erupted. Arrows hissed, shields thudded, the air went tight and iron-tasting. Jimmu's companions moved like a loom. Itsus, his elder brother, held the line. Yukashi, a younger local lord who had long chafed under Yukashi, turned cloak in the right direction, toward justice, not advantage. He flung the gate open and shouted to the villagers that the gods of greed had ruled too long. Then the old gods entered, not as monsters, but as weather. A pressure sank into lungs, treetops thrummed, fog thickened into hands. Men faltered, feeling watched by eyes that were not eyes. Isuzu rang bells until their bright notes cut the pressure like a chisel to stone. "We honor you," she cried to the unseen, "but not those who use your name to chain the living." She poured sake to the earth. Wind shifted, the fog loosened, still the fight cost pain. Itsus took an arrow to the shoulder and laughed through the hurt. Jimmu fought as he led, with measure. He shot to disarm, to break the rhythm of the enemy's surge, to prove that restraint can win ground. When Yukashi struck at him with a boar spear, Jimmu stepped aside and let the man's momentum carry him to the mirror's edge. There, reflected, the war chief saw not a chosen of the mountains, but a tyrant wearing antlers as a mask. He hesitated. That heartbeat was enough. Ukashi and the villagers surged. Ukashi fell, his crest cracking against the gate stone. Silence arrived all at once, the kind that tastes like rain before it falls. Jimmu knelt, pressing Itsusu's wound, and raised the mirror to the hill. "Spirits," he said, "walk with us or walk above us, but do not be dragged by liars into their feasts of fear." The pressure lifted. "In the trees," cranes called. The Battle of the Gods, people later named it, not because deities traded blows, but because truth and terror wrestled, and truth breathed again. Shrines were cleansed, oaths rewritten, and the path east reopened, wider for having been fought for. Word of the Mirror Lord spread along valleys like fire along dry grass. Some greeted it with relief, others with dread. Among the latter was Nagasunehiko, Longshot Shanks, a tall, iron-nerved chieftain who commanded the passes toward the Yamato Basin. He believed strength was a wall, not a bridge, and he barred the road with men and stakes. Jimmu did not rush the pass. He knew a wall's temper can be tested and tuned. For 7 nights, scouts watched wind patterns and listened to rock. The priestess marked the day the hawks circled lowest as auspicious. On that morning, Jimmu unwrapped the sacred bow gifted by an elder of the marshlands, a yew stave that had drunk fog and sun for 100 seasons. He strung it with a cord of braided silk and hair, a thread of lives intertwined, Pali first. Jimmu approached the outpost with only Itsus and Koyane, hands open. "Join us," he said. "Let your strength be a pillar within the hall, not a door barred against it." Nagasunehiko laughed and shot an arrow that shaved a curl from Jimmu's topknot, a message of contempt dressed as skill. "Go back west," he said. "The east already has a lord." He meant himself. Choice is a bow. Drawn too quickly, it snaps. Too slowly, it fails to sing. Jimmu returned to camp and laid the mirror on a smooth stone. He looked into it until the faces of the frightened and the fierce alike dissolved into one thread, a road to a basin where many rivers could meet. When he rose, the plan set in him like a post. At dawn, mists pooled in the pass. Drums sounded from Nagasunehiko's palisade, slow, confident. Jimmu's people moved like reed shadows. A file here with wicker shields, a team there to cut stakes, archers taking the high scree. Jimmu climbed to a ledge and breathed until the bow felt like a second spine. He knocked a signal arrow, tipped with a tiny mirror fragment that caught the pale light. The arrow flew, not at a throat, not at a heart, but at a gong hung beneath the palisade gate. It struck, ringing the valley into attention. At that note, archers loosed to split ropes that held log screens. Screens fell, blocking the enemy's own lanes. Shield teams rushed to wedge the gate. Itsus, grinning through pain, knocked down the palisade ladder with a hooked staff. The fight turned not on blood, but on balance. Disorient, redirect, resolve. When Nagasunehiko finally stood within spear's reach, Jimmu lowered his bow. "Your people deserve more than your fear," he said. "Stand with us." The tall chieftain's jaw nodded. Pride is bone, not silk. He raised his spear. Jimmu's next shot struck the spear shaft, splintering intent without shattering life. The men behind the chieftain wavered. A young warrior, his nephew, stepped between them, palms out. "Enough," he said to his uncle and to the wind. "A door can be a wall reborn. The passes opened, victory can fracture as easily as defeat if it is not set with care." As the passes eased, Jimmu resisted the urge to flood the basin with his will. Instead, he listened. The Yamato plain spread like an open hand, fingers of river, palm of field, knuckles of village mounds. Each knuckle had its story, its shrine, its quarrels saged into custom. To unite the clans, he would need more than a bow. he would need a table. A great council was called at the foot of a hill crowned with camphor trees. Jimmu's people built a long shelter with an open spine, so wind and word could pass through. Mats were set, water jars cooled in shade, and the mirror was placed at the head, not as a threat, but as a reminder. Chiefs arrived in procession, Tatsuta of the wind-swept ford, Sumi of the black soil paddies, Kamo of the river bends, Katsuragi of the western ridge. Nagasunehiko came late, jaw set, nephew at his side. Jimmu opened not with a claim but with a story of Ninigi's descent, of the three treasures as covenants, of roads that could turn raids into markets and rival shrines, into a pilgrimage circuit that fed all. He proposed a charter, disputes judged before the mirror, hostage taking ended and replaced by fosterage, where sons of one clan were raised in the homes of allies, river tolls standardized, harvest festivals synchronized so bands of dancers and traders would stitch villages into a single rhythm. Arguments came hot. Some feared losing faith, others losing the quiet profit of chaos. Isuzu walked the mats, pouring sake, catching sparks before they became fires. Koyani scribbled amendments, clauses for drought years, provisions for widows and orphans after storms. Jimmu spoke least when voices rose most. A leader's silence can be a well others draw from. On the second night, drums began in the distance, youths from rival villages answering one another across fields. This was not war drum, but festival beat. Laughter punctured dread. In that loosened air, the fosterage clause passed. Kamo and Tatsuta swapped sons in ceremony, tears and bravado in equal measure. "Keep him alive," one father said to the other. "So I must keep yours," Nagasunehiko rose. The hall tightened like a bow. He looked at his nephew, then at Jimmu. "I kept this pass because I believed only my hand was steady enough," he said. "But steadiness can be shared." He set his spear upon the mat and touched the mirror with 2 fingers. "Vow enough." A ripple traveled the hall as other lords followed with tokens. Oars, twos, driti, hose, antler crests, laid down not as surrender but as joining. At dawn, smoke from 100 cook fires rose straight into a windless sky, a sign the elders read as favor. The basin felt different, as if threads formerly tangled had laid themselves flat. The charter was sealed with exchanged jewels, with rice sprinkled from baskets, with a sword raised and swiftly sheathed. Yamato was no longer a direction. It was a circle large enough for many fires. Dawn arrived, like a vow written in light. The Yamato basin breathed a silver mist as drums measured the morning, slow, deliberate, ancestral. Paths laid by many clans, now braided into one road leading up the sacred hill. At its crest stood a hall newly raised, cedar sweet and wide to the breeze. Its eaves hung with white paper streamers that whispered like 1,000 blessings. Jimmu entered barefoot over polished boards, carrying not conquest but covenant. The mirror gleamed upon its stand, jewels coiled like a river, the sword sleeping in its sheath. The people filled the slope below, farmers with straw hats pressed to their chests, chieftains beneath banners, children craning for a glimpse of a world being born. Smoke from offerings rose in plumes that seemed to stitch earth to sky. Isuzu, the priestess, led the Harai purification. Salt, water, words, simple as rain, strong as granite. Koyani recited the lineage from Amaterasu light to Ninigi's descent to the long road east that had finally reached its quiet end and new beginning. Jimmu knelt, palms downward, grounding himself to the wood and the soil beneath it. "Let my rule be a bridge," he murmured, "not a tower." The regalia were borne forward. First, the mirror. He gazed into it and saw not a crowned figure, but canals to be dug, levees to be mended, quarrels to be cooled before they turned to iron. Next, The Magatama, he lifted the chain and felt the weight of many hearts strung together. Finally, the sword. He touched the hilt and remembered storms that had been taught to listen. He drew it only a hand's breadth, enough for a line of light to cross the ceiling beam, then returned it to quiet. A hush rippled the hill. Old women wept and laughed in the same breath. Children clapped their hands in patterns. They would teach their children. Koyane proclaimed the era name of peace, to begin with the rice-planting moon. Messengers ran to shrines in every quarter, carrying salt and songs to bind outskirts to center. Jimmu rose and turned, not toward the court, but toward the crowd. He bowed, longer than any expected, and the hill bowed back. Even Nagasune Hiko, who had once barred the passes, bent his head and smiled, like a man relieved of a boulder he had carried too long. Legged crow. The three-legged crow lifted into the new sun. A breeze moved through the camphor leaves, and the streamers at the eaves answered with soft applause. Yamato had its emperor. The emperor had his work. The coronation-s echoes had scarcely faded when new drums spoke from the river mouth. Deep, sea-salted, stranger, cadenced. Boats with tall prows slid up the water like swans in armor. Their sails bore a device unknown in Yamato, a spiral within a crescent, tide-cradling moon. At the prow stood an envoy with a lacquered chest. Behind her, oarsmen with hair knotted high and cloaks stitched with shells. They were emissaries of the Queen of Wa, the sea-ruled sovereign, whose islands braided trade and rumor beyond the horizon. Some in the court stiffened. Foreign tides can carry hidden storms. Jimmu signaled welcome and had mats laid beside the river so the talks would ride the same wind as the boats that had brought them. The envoy, Himata, spoke with measured warmth. Her queen had heard that the east now beat like a single drum. She offered friendship woven of 3 cords, exchange of salt and steel, shared rights for safe crossing, and mutual refuge for storm-broken crews. In return, she asked access to Yamato's S-markets and a treaty of witness. If either realm suffered famine or plague, the other would send grain and healers. Isuzu poured sake, the river answered, with a gleam. Koyane unrolled maps blank at their margins, ready to be taught. Fisher chiefs from the coast joined, sleeves still damp. They spoke of currents, like roads, and of reefs that could be allies or assassins depending on tide. As the day lengthened, the lacquered chest was opened. Inside lay gifts, cobalt glass beads, a bronze mirror with a foreign ring, and a silk banner embroidered with the Queen-S spiral crescent. Yet caution is a steward of peace. Jimmu asked for proof of reciprocity, not written in ink, but in ritual. He proposed twin ceremonies, one in Yamato, one in the Queen-S chief harbor, performed on the same moon, each mirroring the other so sailors would feel at home on either shore. Hemmed cloth was cut and exchanged. The spiral crescent was sewn beside Yamato's paper streamers. The court murmured at the beauty of it, not one emblem swallowing another, but 2 speaking in the same breath. Night rose on purple feet. Torches mirrored in the river as dancers from both crews. Oarsmen and farmers alike learned each other's steps. Laughter found a common language sooner than grammar did. When the moon cleared the trees, 3 boats pushed off to trace a figure 8 on the water, sign of endless return. The 3-legged crow followed, curious, then settled on the mast and slept. At parting, Himata bowed and placed a sealed letter for the queen in Jimmu's hands and a matching letter for Jimmu in hers. 2 wings, she said. Let them carry us. Jimmu smiled. The realm had gained not a border but a horizon. Peace needs guardians not only of wood and spear, but of listening. In the 7th month after coronation, omens began to drift like ash. Cranes nesting too low, eels refusing traps, a tremor that shook cups without spilling them. Isuzu advised a night of vigil at the Hinokuma Grove, where stones older than alphabet kept their own counsel. The court went light, few guards, no pomp. They washed at the stream, dressed in plain white, and carried offerings of salt and first fruits. The wind moved through cedar like a low drum. Stars came out in handfuls. The moon bided its time, behind a thin veil. At the grover's heart stood an oracle stone, smooth with centuries of knees and palms. The shriness blind Miko, Saya, awaited them, hair unbound, bells woven at her wrist, eyes milky and unafraid. She listened not with ears, but with the skin of the world. Jimmu knelt and placed the mirror before her. "Tell us what the land whispers," he said. Saya's bells chimed once. "The land says, 'Build with water as patience.' A shadow walks with a banner cut from your own cloth." The court shifted uneasily. "Is it rebellion?" Koyane asked. "Not rebellion," she said, "but impatience dressed as duty. A harvest taken before its moon is still hunger." They kept vigil. In the second watch, the ground hummed as if a giant had strummed it. A deer stepped into the clearing and laid down, unconcerned. Saya breathed the earth's rhythm and spoke again. "Fire will test the western storehouses, set stones higher, seed rice in distant paddies, so that loss cannot find all granaries at once." In the third watch, the veil slid from the moon. Saya's voice lowered. "Beware the gate where gifts and orders share the same mouth. Put 2 hands on the plow, one of law, one of kindness. When the crow circles 3 times but does not land, wait. Do not send soldiers, send singers." The advice settled strange and lovely in the listener's bones. At dawn, dew jeweled every leaf. Jimmu helped Saya rise. Her hand found his, and squeezed with surprising strength. "A ruler is a flute," she murmured, "empty so breath can make music." He nodded, feeling both lighter and more burdened. The weeks that followed proved the prophecy's bone. A cousin governor in the west, eager to please, demanded levies before the harvest. Jimmu countermanded and sent seed and songs instead, along with skilled irrigation men. A careless lantern set a storehouse roof alight. Stone ridges built ahead of time kept the blaze from leaping street to street. And when rumors of a tax revolt rattled the eastern ford, Jimmu arrived not with spears but with drummers and rice. The crow circled thrice, then landed. A nation breathed through its rituals. After the prophecy, Jimmu moved to weave custom into calendar so the realm would remember itself even in storm. The first great Daijo like harvest rite was set for the 11th moon, when rice hangs heavy and gratitude needs a mouth. Preparation began in fields, not palaces. Jimmu visited paddies with bare calves and rolled sleeves, asking farmers about water levels and weeds, about the taste of new grain. He helped lift bundles to racks and laughed when a child splashed him full in the face. If the emperor avoids mud, he told Koyane later, the laws will, too. In the capital, carpenters raised a temporary purification hall from fresh-cut wood, still fragrant with sap. Every joint lashed, not nailed, nothing that could not be taken down and reborn. Isuzu taught the youths to twist straw into ropes and the elder women to fold paper into lightning-shaped streamers. Priests rehearsed the choreography of offering salt, water, sakaki, rice. Dancers practiced steps that felt like the river's own gate. On the chosen night, the moon stood clean and bright. Jimmu fasted, bathed, and donned white robes. Alone first, he entered the inner tente and ate the first rice, not as privilege, but as test, tasting on behalf of all. He chewed slowly, as if reading the year in each grain, floods, mended, blight held at bay, kindness, passed hand to hand like a lantern. Then the doors opened, and the people's rite began. Drums marked the four quarters. The mirror was uncovered, jewels draped the altar. The sword lay between, a sleeping mountain of intent. Koyani read proclamations that turned Sayas warnings into law, staggered storage, delayed levies. Singers dispatched before soldiers. Crow feathers were placed in the shrine to honor omens recognized. Envoys of the Queen of Vua attended, bringing a bowl of sea salt and a silk streamer dyed the color of deep water. They bowed and performed the twin gesture agreed upon at the river, the spiral with the crescent, then the lightning paper. Two shores, one tide. Farmers from distant valleys arrived carrying their best tools decorated with ribbons. Those tools were blessed and returned sharpened by the court smiths, as a quiet promise that ritual is practical or it is play-acting. When the dance began, it seemed the floor itself flowed. The steps traced sowing, tending, reaping, sharing. A year compressed into a song. In the final movement, a child carried a basket of rice up the aisle and set it before the mirror. Jimmu knelt beside the child and spoke so all could hear. The empire is this, many hands, one bowl. As torches guttered toward dawn, the purification hall already smelled of dismantling. By noon it would be gone, leaving only flattened grass and stronger memory. A rite that can be lifted and carried is a rite that travels where the people do. Yamato had learned its breath. Peace has roots, but roots must push against stones. After the rites, Yamato's basin thrummed with shared rhythm, yet beneath the harmony, restlessness coiled. Not every clan accepted the new order gladly. Some saw unity as a yoke, others feared that their ancestral gods would fade beneath Amaterasu's light. Rumors moved quicker than messengers. Whispers spoke of a southern chieftain, Mononobe no Takeru, who gathered discontented warriors in the border valleys. He claimed the emperor's rights weakened the old mountain spirits, and that the regalia were hollow trinkets. His banner bore not the sun but a twisted flame, a challenge flaring at night on distant ridges. Jimmu did not rush to strike. He sent singers first, traveling with drums and gifts of salt, reminding the rebels that Yamato's hearth was wide. Some clans listened and returned, others turned the singers away. Then came raids. Granaries toppled, ferries overturned, shrines defaced. Fear prickled. People asked whether the emperor's patience was strength or weakness. At council, its use demanded swift as steel. Isuzu cautioned. A fire smothered too quickly leaves embers. One controlled becomes a forge. Jimmu chose the forge. He allowed the rebels' raids to strike, but ensured each place struck was swiftly rebuilt by Yamato's own hand. Burned granaries were restocked by Imperial reserves. Defaced shrines were rededicated with greater offerings. Villagers saw who destroyed and who restored. Hearts measured the difference. Yet when Mononobe's force swelled too great, confrontation became inevitable. Scouts reported his warriors moving through cedar passes, planning to descend upon the capital itself. Jimmu led his companions to the foothills, where he raised the mirror at dawn. Its reflection struck the slopes. Rebels faltered, unnerved. But Takeru laughed and shouted, "The mirror blinds! Spears see truth!" The clash began. The fighting was brief but fierce. Its use, still scarred from Uda, fought with grit until his strength gave way. He fell, laughing defiance. Jimmu's bow sang, measured, precise. The priestess struck bells to rally courage. In the end, Mononobe was seized by his own kin, weary of his endless burning. They bound him and delivered him to Jimmu, who spared his life but exiled him to the distant coast. where flame could no longer threaten. The rebellion had cast its shadow, but the way it was answered became light. Mercy, not massacre, proved Yamato's spine. The people whispered, "The emperor does not rule with fear. He rules with endurance." The rebellion's embers glowed still, though Takeru was gone. In the north, the Kumaso clans muttered, fierce as boars, distrustful of central rule. In the east, remnants of Nagasunehiko's allies nursed pride like a wound. Yamato had been bound in council, but not all threads were tight. Jimmu understood peace secured by patience alone can fray. To hold Yamato, he must prove both mercy and resolve. Thus began the final consolidation, the quiet but decisive fall of rivals. Against the Kumaso, Jimmu marched not with endless ranks but with selected companions. Their fortress, woven of wood and thorn, rose from marshland like a snarl. The emperor approached openly, bearing sake and salted fish. The Kumaso leaders, wary but curious, invited him to feast. Mid-banquet, when their boastful chief swore that no man alive could enter their walls without bending knee, Jimmu rose and revealed himself, bow in hand. His arrow split a drinking cup from across the hall. The Kumaso gasped. Power without slaughter broke their pride. They yielded, swearing oaths by the mirror, and were welcomed as kin. Elsewhere, in the eastern ridges, skirmishes flared. Former allies of Nagasunehiko tested Yamato's patience. Here Jimmu's approach shifted. Swift strikes, precise and unrelenting. Villages taken without burning. Warriors disarmed but not slain. Chiefs given seats in council instead of graves. Those who resisted unto the end were defeated in ritual combat, their names carved not as traitors, but as lessons. By the third winter, resistance dwindled. Shrines long divided were rededicated in unison, roadways patrolled by once rival clans together. Festivals carried dances from one valley to another, until the basin no longer felt like borders stitched, but like one cloth. When the last holdout chief knelt, Jimmu lifted him up instead of pressing his head down. "Strength is not who kneels to me," he said, "but who stands beside me." That phrase spread like fire through thatched halls, repeated by elders to youths, until it became proverb. Thus ended the cycle of rivals. Yamato stood unbroken, not by blood alone, but by the deliberate mixture of mercy, spectacle, and justice. From then on, the emperor's authority was more than descent from heaven. It was proof, tested in storm, that a realm could be held together without tearing itself apart. With rebellion stilled and rivals subdued, Jimmu turned his gaze from war to permanence. "A tree without roots falls at the first storm," he told his council. So must Yamato plant a root that feeds all. He chose a place where rivers braided into one, ringed by gentle hills and sacred groves, the future capital of Kashihara. The work began with rituals, not tools. Priests marked the cardinal points. Dancers traced the boundaries, with steps of sowing and harvest. The mirror was set at the center, jewels coiled around it, sword laid nearby. Only after these rites did the carpenters sink the first post. Villagers came with baskets, not wages, rice, fish, woven mats. Warriors laid down spears to haul beams. Chiefs sent their sons to dig irrigation ditches, proving service was no less noble than command. Women sang as they packed walls with clay, the rhythm of their song steadying laborers' shoulders. Streets were planned wide enough for carts and processions, canals to water paddies and carry boats. A central hall rose, flanked by granaries and storehouses, all roofed with cypress bark. Shrines were built within sight of one another, their bells answering like neighbors calling across fences. When the first festival was held, lanterns lined the canals, their flames mirrored in water like stars fallen to earth. Music flowed, Banners swayed, and people realized that they no longer belonged to many small realms, but to one broad hearth. Thus Yamato gained not only an emperor but a heart, a place where roads converged, rights anchored, and futures imagined. The capital was not merely built, it was grown to anchor Yamato's new heart. The emperor needed not only walls and shrines, but lineage, an empress, to share the burden of rule and embody harmony between clans. Elders whispered of Himetara Isuzuhime, a woman of the Nigi line, known for wisdom as well as beauty. Her people dwelled by the sea, guardians of tides and pearl divers, their shrines aligned with the moon. A delegation was sent, bearing lacquered trays of rice and silk. The meeting took place on a beach where waves combed shells into spirals. Jimmu and Isuzuhime walked the shore, speaking not of dowry or borders, but of omens and duties. She asked, "What is Yamato to you?" He answered, "A hearth large enough for all." "What is it to you?" She said, "A song where no voices drowned." Their eyes agreed before their hands did. The marriage was set at Kashihara. The city, still new, dressed itself in banners. Fisherfolk carried gifts of salt, mountain clans brought timber and game, plainsmen brought rice. At the ceremony, the mirror reflected them side by side. Jewels bound their wrists, the sword was drawn between them, then sheathed, a symbol that union was strength restrained. Festivities lasted 3 days. On the first, shrines across Yamato rang bells together. On the second, clans mingled in contests. Archery, dance, rowing, measured not by victory, but by shared joy. On the third, the empress entered the capital in a procession of boats lit with lanterns, trusturi, her robes trailing like moonlight on water. A presence transformed the court. Where Jimmu spoke of endurance, Isuzuhime spoke of gentleness. Where he listened in silence, she questioned boldly. Councils found balance. Farmers' wives came to court, petitions with less fear, seeing themselves in the empress's frank gaze. The union also tightened alliances. Sea routes pledged loyalty, pearl and salt-enriched markets. The moon shrines and sun shrines began to share festivals, synchronizing tides with dawn. Yamato no longer leaned only on the emperor's bow, but on the empress's tide. Strength and rhythm joined. When their first child was born, bells rang in every valley. The people called the infant not prince, but seedling, for he embodied the promise that Yamato was planted to grow, merely to endure. The marriage did not end the realm's trials, but it gave Yamato something more enduring than conquest, continuity. The hearth was no longer a single flame, it was two, joined, feeding a fire that could outlast storms. Every realm needs stories sharp as steel. In the court at Kashihara, one tale held special weight, the story of a sword born from storm, tamed by courage. Generations earlier, Susanoo, the storm god, had slain the 8-headed serpent, Yamata. No, Orochi, a beast that swallowed rivers and coiled around mountains. From its belly he drew forth a blade of impossible beauty, teeth of lightning upon its edge. This sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass cutter, became one of the treasures entrusted to Amaterasu's line. Now it was brought before Emperor Jimmu. Priests unwrapped it from silken layers. Light flickered across the hall, shadows retreating as if wary of its memory. The people gasped. The blade was not only weapon, but history embodied. To hold it was to feel Susanoo's storm still humming, but Jimmu did not lift it as conqueror. Instead, he placed it beside the mirror and jewels. "The sword is last," he declared. "To draw it without cause is to invite the serpent back." His words spread through the clans, echoing in festival chants. Sword last. Justice first. stories grew. Farmers told children how the sword cut fields free from flood. Warriors told how it cut arrogance before it cut flesh. The sword was no longer just relic. It became symbol, teaching that power is strongest when leashed. One summer, a fire raged in the plains, devouring rice fields. Jimmu himself rode to the scene. With the sword in hand, he cut wide swathes through tall grass, creating firebreaks that stopped the blaze. People whispered that Susanu's wild gift had found balance at last. Destruction turned to salvation. In the capital, the sword was enshrined in cedar and guarded day and night. No emperor after Jimmu would take the throne without vowing before it. For Yamato, the sword was not terror but trust, a reminder that true sovereignty is not the freedom to wield steel, but the restraint to keep it sheathed with crown and capital secure. Jimmu turned to what endures longer than any reign: succession. His marriage to Isuzuhime bore children, princes and princesses with the blood of heaven in their veins. The people called them seeds of the sun. The palace resounded with laughter and crying, with lullabies and debates about omens. Elders whispered over which child resembled Ninigi most, which bore Amaterasu's gaze. Jimmu, however, insisted no child inherits by resemblance, only by service. As they grew, the children were not coddled in silks. Princes walked fields, sowed rice, and hunted alongside commoners. Princesses studied rites, learned songs, and advised on disputes. The empress ensured all knew humility before privilege. Festivals marked milestones. At 7 years, children received their first bows and combs. At 13, they offered rice at shrines unaided. At 15, they debated elders before council. The capital grew accustomed to princes kneeling beside farmers, hands dirty with mud. Still, succession was weighty. Koyani advised codifying it. The eldest son by the empress would inherit, but all siblings must serve the realm. Others could become governors, generals, or priestesses. Rivalry would be shaped into duty. When Jimmu announced this law, relief spread. Clans who had feared civil strife saw stability instead. Priests declared it divine will. Farmers cheered, for no famine would be worsened by princes warring among themselves. In later years, poets recalled this moment as when Yamato ceased being fragile as grass and began to grow sturdy as oak. Bloodlines are branches, Jimmu taught, but the trunk is the people. Even emperors are tested by earth and sky. In the 10th year of Jimmu's reign, disaster struck in cruel succession. Storms flooded fields, locusts devoured crops, earthquakes cracked canals. People murmured, had heaven withdrawn its favor? Jimmu walked among them, not aloof but barefoot in mud. He lifted collapsed beams, helped bury the dead, and prayed aloud in the open fields. Yet duty alone could not restore faith. The people needed proof that heaven still walked beside Yamato. Thus he ordered a grand rite of renewal. On the plain outside Kashihara, a circle of stones was raised. Priests carried the mirror, jewels, and sword into the open air. Farmers brought charred rice stalks, fishermen laid broken nets, widows placed sandals of the lost. All sorrows were gathered. At dawn, Jimmu stood within the circle and raised his arms. Storms do not strike to punish, but to remind us we are small before heaven, he declared. Yet the small may endure by holding each other. Then he cast a handful of rice into the wind. Birds swooped down, eating joyfully. A sign, said Isuzu, that life would return. The court distributed seeds from hidden reserves. Irrigation ditches were rebuilt with communal labor. Songs replaced wails. Slowly, Yamato stood again. The trials etched humility into rule. The emperor was not divine because storms never touched him, but because he bore them with his people and turned grief into unity. From then on, whenever disasters struck, villagers whispered, "The emperor has stood in the mud. So can we." As Yamato stabilized, another force began to stir: the warrior clans. Farmers needed protection from raiders on distant borders. Traders needed safe roads. Local strongmen forged bands of armed retainers. Some threatened chaos, but others became shields. Jimmu recognized the tide. He declared that no warrior band could exist apart from clan or court. Each must swear loyalty before the mirror. Thus, warriors became servants of the realm, not lords above it. The most renowned was Takekuchi no Sukune, a commander who trained his men in strict discipline. They drilled with spears in open fields, but also worked paddies in off-seasons, proving strength could plant as well as fight. Other clans followed suit. Warrior culture shifted. Honor meant not only skill in battle, but service in peace. Ceremonies honored this. Before campaigns, warriors purified themselves in rivers, binding vows with sakaki leaves. Afterward, they offered their weapons at shrines before returning home. Songs celebrated not killing, but defending villages, building bridges, escorting travelers. Still, shadows lurked. Some bands grew too proud, threatening to hoard power. Jimmu responded decisively. He personally visited camps, reminding leaders that the sword was last. When one refused, he was stripped of command and made to labor in canals. Humiliation taught where mercy could not. By blending discipline with humility, the warrior clans became Yamato's backbone. They were no longer raiders. They were samurai in seed form, bound not by fear but by covenant. As warrior clans rose to shield the land, Yamato also needed those who guarded the unseen. The emperor knew that swords could steady roads, but only rituals could steady hearts. Thus, priests and shamans became the empire's hidden pillars. In the capital, Isuzu established the Shrine College, a gathering of priestesses, chanters, diviners, and healers. They trained in the old arts, reading smoke, tracing omens in bird flight, listening to river songs. Shamans from distant clans were welcomed, their accents and customs preserved, proving Yamato was strong enough to embrace variety without losing itself. Their duties went beyond prayer. Priests recorded harvests, calculated calendars, and judged disputes in village squares. Shamans healed with herbs, sang to restless spirits, and calmed the fearful before war. Together, they built a bridge between the world of men and the will of kami. But faith is fragile. Some accused shamans of manipulating fear. Others doubted priests who grew too close to politics. Thursa. Kushinsis. Jimmu intervened. He decreed that priests must serve without wealth, supported only by offerings, never by taxes. Shamans were to travel, not settle, so their power would remain rooted in service, not dominion. During festivals, their presence was unmistakable. Bells rang like threads of light. Drums carried chants from mountain to valley. The emperor himself joined rites, bowing with his people, showing that no rank was too high to kneel before the unseen. Thus the priests and shamans became Yamato's conscience, reminding warriors of humility, chiefs of limits, and farmers of the sacred woven through daily labor. Their chants outlived battles. Their fire kept the empire human. A realm cannot endure on rites alone. Order must be written in words as well as prayers. Jimmu gathered chiefs, priests, and warrior heads at Kashihara to craft the first imperial laws. They did not carve statutes into stone, but into memory, ritualized recitation at festivals so each generation carried them like heartbeat. Laws were simple but firm. Disputes judged in council with mirror present. Dice theft repaid threefold, not by blood. Boostland shared through irrigation ditches, water flowing by turn. Boost warriors bound to protect, never to extort. Schultz shrines inviolable, their keepers untouchable. When first read, silence gripped the hall. People were unaccustomed to justice spoken in public, without bribe or fear. A farmer cried out, "Even we are remembered." The cheer that followed rattled beams, but law is tested in shadows. A noble's son stole grain during famine. Clans whispered he would escape punishment. Jimmu summoned him before the mirror. Calmly, he ordered restitution threefold, stripping him of status until debt was repaid. The people gasped, but hope soared. The emperor's word bound even his kin. Soon, courts appeared in villages. Shrines became court houses. Priests and warriors together enforced rulings. Clans learned disputes could end without spears. Trade grew, markets flourished. The laws were not perfect, but they were seed. From them grew the sense that Yamato was not only ruled from above, but shared by all. But justice was no longer whim. It was rhythm. Beyond rice fields and shrines stretched the sea, vast, dangerous, promising. Fisherfolk had long braved the waves, but now Yamato looked outward. Jimmu supported the rise of the Sea Kings, clans who mastered tides and winds, extending the empire's reach across coasts. Boats grew larger, sails stronger. Harbors blossomed at river mouths. Lighthouses of fire baskets guided sailors. Sea Kings traded salt, shells, pearls, and iron. They brought news of distant shores, islands of smoke, coasts where strangers worshipped under moonlight. With trade came trial. Pirates struck, swift and merciless. Jinjumu declared the sea sacred as land. Warriors patrolled waters, bows ready. But he also commanded diplomacy, treaties with Wa, alliances with coastal clans. The sea became not barrier, but bridge. Festivals honored the tides. Boats laden with offerings drifted into surf, carrying prayers for safe return. Empress Isuzuhime herself joined these rites, casting pearls into the waves. The people believed the sea bowed to her moon-born grace. By Jimmu's later years, Yamato's name traveled on foam and gull wings. Sea Kings became keepers of trade and defense, expanding the empire's horizon. Yamato was no longer only a basin ringed by hills. It was an archipelago of futures. All lives, even heaven-born, meet twilight. After decades of rule, Emperor Jimmu grew frail. His hair silvered like frost, his voice gentler but still steady. He walked slower, but his eyes saw farther than youth. He summoned his children, chiefs, priests, and warriors. In the capital hall, the regalia shone: mirror, jewels, sword. "These are not mine," he said. "They are yours and those after you." I was only their keeper. His last journey was to the hill, where he had first bowed before the people. There, he planted his staff beside the camphor tree he had sown years earlier. The tree had grown tall, its branches sheltering birds. "So must Yamato," he whispered. On his final night, the Yatagarasu circled the palace 3 times before vanishing into stars. Priests said it was his spirit, returning to Amaterasu. His body was laid in a tomb of stone and earth, sealed with rites, his name carried into eternity. But his death was not an end. Farmers still repeated his words: "Strength is not who kneels, but who stands beside." Warriors swore oaths by his memory. Children played at being emperors, planting sticks as staffs in the ground. Thus Jimmu became eternal, not only as first emperor, but as story, as standard, as the dawn of a people. The earth closed over Jimmu's body, but his presence did not vanish. His tomb at Unebiyama, a hill shrouded in pines, was raised with care. Stone chambers sealed, earth heaped high, and terraces ringed with cedar stakes. Priests chanted day and night as warriors kept vigil. The burial was not silence, but conversation between worlds. At dawn, a mirror was set at the tomb's entrance, catching first light to remind the spirit it belonged to heaven as well as earth. At dusk, the sword was unsheathed only a hand's breadth, then sheathed again, so storms would guard the resting place, but not devour it. Jewels were buried alongside, a chain binding him to descendants yet unborn. The people came in procession. Farmers carried rice stalks, fishermen laid nets, children dropped pebbles at the foot of the hill. Their gifts were small, but together they made a mountain of devotion. Poets compared the tomb to a womb, not an end, but a chamber of return. Elders proclaimed Jimmu no longer mortal emperor, but kami of Yamato. His spirit would protect harvests, steady storms, and guide rulers. The tomb became a shrine. Festivals rose around it. Priests climbed Unebiyama and sang hymns to remind the land that its first emperor still breathed in stone and soil. Thus, in death, Jimmu became eternal, not ashes, but anchor. The empire's body could grow because its spirit was rooted. A tomb can close, but succession must open. After Jimmu's death, the court trembled with uncertainty. Would unity unravel without the emperor's presence? The answer lay in continuity. In Kashihara, a flame was kindled from Jimmu's funeral pyre, carried in bronze urns to shrines across Yamato. This was the eternal flame, symbol of unbroken lineage. Each time it flickered, priests fed it with pine resin and rice husks, whispering the emperor's name. His eldest son was enthroned, the regalia once again displayed. But unlike coronation's grandeur, this rite was quiet, emphasizing humility before inheritance. The new emperor swore, "I sit not in my father's shadow, but in his light." Across the land, the flame became proof of Yamato's resilience. In villages, families lit torches from it to begin planting. In harbors, sailors prayed before flame bowls for safe voyages. Even warriors swore oaths by its glow. It was said that as long as the flame endured, Yamato could not be broken. Years later, when storms or famine threatened, priests would carry embers from the eternal flame to afflicted places, believing its warmth renewed courage. More than symbol, it was practice, a ritual technology binding faith and survival. Thus, the empire learned that emperors may die, but their light can be transmitted. The eternal flame was Jimmu's last gift, permanence carried in fire. Regalia defined Yamato, mirror, jewels, sword. With each succession they became more than heirlooms, they became anchors of legitimacy. To guard them, Jimmu's successors appointed a special order, the Keepers of Treasures. Chosen from priestly families, the keepers swore lifelong vows. They never married, never left the capital without command. Their duty was not only physical protection but ritual, polishing mirror with sacred cloth, stringing jewels anew, keeping sword sheathed yet honored. Each dawn, they bowed thrice before the regalia. Each dusk, they sealed them in cedar chests bound with cords. Story spread of their devotion. One keeper, when fire swept a storehouse, carried the sword into river waters and held it above his head until rescued. Another, falsely accused of theft, refused to speak in his defense, believing silence before the regalia would prove his truth. The sword gleamed brighter that night. Charges dissolved. Their presence gave stability. Even when emperors quarreled or councils split, the regalia remained inviolate. People believed the treasures themselves chose rulers, the keepers their guardians. Over centuries, their role grew sacred. Shrines honored anonymous keepers. Their graves bore no names, only etched symbols of mirror, jewels, and sword. Their anonymity was their nobility. Thus the treasures lived not as objects, but as eternal institutions, unbroken by death or time. Yamato's spirit endured. Carried by silent hands, peace is never unchallenged. As Yamato grew, new faiths clashed with old. Mountain shamans, river priests, and coastal spirit keepers sometimes resisted imperial rites, fearing their gods would be forgotten. Thus erupted the War of Spirits, not armies, but beliefs in collision. Shrines were defaced, rival rituals shouted across valleys. Villages divided. Some swore by Amaterasu's mirror, others by local stone idols. When drought struck, accusations flew. "Your rites angered the rain," cried one clan. "No, yours silenced the river," replied another. The emperor sought counsel. Isuzu urged tolerance. The kami are many voices in one song. Warriors demanded force. Jimmu's heirs chose a middle path, dialogue backed by ritual authority. Envoys carried both imperial chants and offerings to local shrines. If accepted, shrines were incorporated. If rejected violently, warriors intervened, securing idols but rededicating them within Yamato's fold. Legend tells of a great confrontation at Mount Miwa, where thunder spirits roared against imperial rites. Priests and shamans chanted through the storm. At dawn, lightning struck a cedar, but did not burn it. Both sides saw it as sign the mountain kami had joined, not opposed the imperial pantheon. Thus the war ended not with annihilation but synthesis. Local gods became kami under one heaven, shrines woven into the greater Shinto tapestry. The people learned Yamato's strength lay not in crushing spirits but in embracing them. Diversity became unity, not fracture. And the empire breathed easier, its faith now a vast sky with room for every star. After the War of Spirits, Yamato settled into a rhythm of seasons and rites. Yet power is a river with many channels. There came a time, some say after illness, others say after a troubling omen, when the emperor withdrew from public sight. Priests whispered of fasting, warriors spoke of secret journeys, common folk called him the hidden emperor. He did not vanish from rule. Edicts still flowed, measured and merciful, but they arrived as if carried by wind, a lowered tax for drought valleys, a release of prisoners after a bountiful harvest, a grant of timber to rebuild a storm-torn shrine. The hand that signed remained unseen. Some grew nervous, others trusted more, believing the emperor worshipped in solitude to keep heaven's thread unbroken. Legends multiplied. One told how he walked the realm in plain clothes, sleeping in farmer huts, tasting millet porridge, learning which roads washed out in rain. Another told how he sought a mountain oracle and met a white stag who bowed, antlers crowned with frost. A third claimed he tended the eternal flame himself when priests were weary, feeding it pine resin until it leapt like sunrise. In his absence from court, a regent of the mirror, a calm woman chosen from the priestly line, stood at the dais to receive petitions. She wore no crown, only bells at her wrist. "The emperor listens," she would say, "though you cannot see his face." She insisted all decrees be read beside the mirror, so that law reflected light, not shadow. Not all welcomed this age of veiled sovereignty. A coalition of ambitious lords tested the boundaries, levying extra grain and bullying river towns. They expected weak response. Instead, messengers arrived by night with writs signed in vermilion, levies cancelled, wronged families compensated, lords summoned to Kashihara. When they entered the hall, they found the regent, the keepers of treasures, and a figure behind a silk screen. A voice, gentle, unmistakable, spoke, "Power you borrow from the people is not yours to hoard." The lords bowed until foreheads touched reed mats. Outside, rain began, soft and absolute, as if heaven stamped the decree. Years later, when the emperor reappeared in public, hair silvered at the temples. The realm felt oddly steadier than before. He said only, "A ruler must sometimes step back so the realm steps forward." The hidden emperor became a parable. Leadership by presence in absence, the strength to be unseen so that institutions learn to stand. South of snow-boned peaks and beyond river-silk plains rose a cone so perfect it seemed drawn by a goddess fingertip, Mount Fuji. In the years after the emperor's return, the mountain announced itself. Tremors walked beneath fields, hot springs exhaled, ash dusted the morning like gray pollen. People looked up and called the peak sacred not for beauty alone, but for breath and fire. Fisherfolk saw Fuji as a lighthouse of stone. Farmers read it as a weather drum. Priests heard it as a cavernous bell. When the mountain stirred harder, night glows near the crater, a throat-clearing rumble. The court feared panic. The regent of the mirror counseled pilgrimage, not garrisons. "We must greet the mountain as a kami," she said, "before we defend against it as a storm." A procession set out. Emperor, empress, priests, shamans, sea kings, warrior captains, and children carrying baskets of rice. As they neared the foothills, paths turned to pumice, and wind carried sulfur like a god's spice. At a lakeshore, the company stopped. The emperor ordered the regalia as symbols, not the treasures themselves, placed upon an altar of lava rock, a polished mirror disc, a string of carved jade, a training sword. "We come with humility," he said, "and with memory and with restraint." Rites began. Shamans drummed a heartbeat. Priests chanted names of rivers born from Fuji snows. Sea kings poured brine to link mountain to sea. The emperor lifted the mirror disc and angled it toward the summit. For a moment, the sun flashed up the face of the mountain like a ladder. Wind fell still. Even birds paused mid-flight. Then the mountain answered, not with doom, but with a long, steady exhale. Steam rose in a white ribbon, ash settled soft as moth wing. Isuzu interpreted, "The mountain accepts our vow. Tend soil, honor fire, build where water teaches." Engineers mapped lahar paths. Villages shifted. Canals were dug to shunt floods. Temples sprouted at safe terraces where pilgrims could greet the peak without daring its throat. In the years that followed, Fuji became teacher. Its snows fed paddies. Its timber framed shrines. Its silhouette calmed hearts. When it rumbled again, the people did not panic. They remembered the altar at the lake and the promise it held. Human craft braided to reverence. The sacred mountain's awakening did not make Yamato smaller. It made it wiser. To share a land with fire is to learn proportion. Our houses, temporary, our duties, lasting. The realm had learned to listen, to mountains, to rivers, to silence. Now it learned to listen backward through time. Elders taught that every deed leaves a tone, and that the land carries those tones like wind through bamboo. The priests called this the echo of the ancestors. Villages began keeping Kojiki like ledgers, not for taxes alone, but for stories. Births, oaths, reconciliations, even good harvest jokes were inked beside shrine records. At festivals, children recited lines about farmers who faced flood and laughed. Warriors who laid down spears to lift beams. Queens who threw pearls to teach generosity. The past became a lantern carried on new roads. Rituals deepened. Before planting, families stood in doorways with sandals in hand, remembering those who had worn them thin. At funerals, mourners walked in silence to the nearest river, dipped hands, and lifted water to the sun, returning a portion of life to the flow. In courts, the mirror was turned slightly so petitioners saw themselves beside the faint outline of parents and grandparents reminding them that judgment falls on lineage as well as self. The emperor ordered a hall of echoes built in Kashihara, simple cedar, open eaves, a floor polished by bare feet. Along one wall, tablets named the known dead. Along the other, blank tablets waited for those yet to come. Between them an empty space. "This," said the regent, "is for the living, who must decide which wall their deeds will speak to." Shinto, in the people's cess-mouth, simply the way, grew less like a doctrine and more like a posture, head bowed to wind, hands busy with tools, eyes open to omens that ask for care rather than fear. Travelers left offerings at road shrines without priest or sermon, a rice ball for a tired stranger, a sprig of sakaki for a crossroads. The gods were many, the gratitude was one. A poem copied so often its brushstroke softened became the hawless refrain. Yo, I am not alone. Footprints walk behind my step. I plant for mouths I will not meet. The sun lifts, and ancestors stand a little taller. In such echoes, Yamato found endurance. Armies might march, storms might chew the hills, courts might argue, but the people had learned the oldest craft. Remembering forward, there arrives a hinge in every nation, when story steps onto the stone of record. For Yamato, that hinge turned as scribes learned to trap sound in symbols, not only in chants and drums, but in ink. Oral rivers met written channels. What had been mist became bridge. Messengers carried bamboo slips. Courts kept calendars down to eclipses. Treaties with sea realms bore seals instead of shells. Genealogies, once recited, were copied. Laws, once sung, were drafted clean, their edges crisp as winter air. There was loss, the looseness of myth, the play of variant tale. There was gain, a shared page that stretched from valley to valley like a plank between boats. Foreign envoys brought scripts and crafts. Yamato shaped them to local grain. A new office opened, Scribe of the Dawn, charged to record not merely victories, but famines relieved, canals cut, shrines rebuilt, songs taught. Write the ordinary, the emperor insisted. It is the beam under the painted roof. As writing spread, so did roads. Way stations rose with granaries and stables, mile markers inlaid with simple sigils, sun for east, wave for coast, mountain for north. Guided even those who could not read, the capital S markets grew talkative, coins clicked, measurements standardized. Yamato's many hearths became a house. With this house came a name that grew beyond the basin, Japan. Traders used it first. Poets toyed with it. Diplomats sealed it. The land of rising sun, said one envoy. And the people smiled because the name felt both new and already true. Myth had not been discarded. It had been housed, a foundation beneath floors of record. Some feared that ink would tame spirit. The Hall of Echoes answered with a festival where children wrote a single ancestor's deed on paper, then read it aloud, then burned it, smoke carrying memory skyward even as copies remained in ledgers. Thus, the realm learned a balance, permanence that still breathes. On a clear winter morning, the emperor stood on the capital's south road. As a caravan departed, scribes, warriors, priests, healers, an empire in miniature, bound for distant provinces to fix a broken embankment and teach a new winter planting. He watched dust lift behind wheels, then turned to the regent. "We were a story," he said. "We are also a record. Let both be true, from myth to history." Yamato did not shrink. It gained edges that maps could hold, and a heart that maps could not. Thus Japan stepped into the long corridor of time, sunrise, lighting its pages, a nation that has learned to listen, to rivers, to mountains, to the murmurs of memory, still seeks a single sentence, to carry on its tongue. In Yamato, that sentence hardened into vow and softened into lullaby, the mandate of the emperor, not a fist, but a flame carried from dawn to dawn. In the great hall of Kashihara, the regalia stood where generations had breathed their promises. The mirror remembered laughter, a coaxing light out of darkness. The jewels remembered kinship, braided from many strands. The sword remembered the wild, turned toward protection. Now the emperor rose to speak the sentence that would frame these memories into law of spirit. "Let the throne be not a mountain above the people," he declared, "but a sun among them, rising, steady, returning." The emperor's task is threefold: to reflect, to bind, to restrain. He touched each treasure in turn: reflect mirror, bind jewels, restrain sword. The hall inhaled as if it, too, had lungs. Messengers carried the wording on bamboo and by breath, repeating it until it fit into work songs and market banter. Judges began trials by turning the mirror slightly, so every speaker saw themselves lit by its rim. Clan leaders sealed alliances by exchanging a pair of magatama. Warriors renewed their oath with the sword drawn just enough to show the line of light along its spine, then sheathed it with a kiss of the thumb and seizes. But a mandate must also meet weather. When a frost came early, the court remitted levies with a single line: sun must warm, not scorch. When a proud general asked to expand the borders, the emperor replied, "A sun that chases night into new rooms forgets to tend its own hearth." Containment, too, was part of light. In schools, children traced the threefold sign: circle for mirror, chain for jewels, straight stroke for sword, and learned to apply it to quarrels over toys and taking at fountains. Farmers painted the sign on granary doors. Sailors carved it into oars. It traveled faster than spears and settled deeper than scrolls. At year's end, a rite gathered the realm beneath one sky. Fires were lit on hilltops. From each fire, runners carried embers down to villages. The emperor stood at the capital gate with a simple clay lamp. He did not command the flame forward. He handed it forward. The gesture was the mandate, embodied. Thus the throne's authority became less a height than a horizon, a consistent promise. That tomorrow would arrive with work to do and warmth to share. The emperor's mandate was not the right to be obeyed, but the duty to be dependable. In that constancy, Yamato's sun learned to rise within many hands. No sun is eternal in a single sky. It is eternal because it returns. So, too, with the throne. Faces change, oaths remain. The last chapter of this dawn is not a closing. It is a continuance written in ordinary hands. At first light, the capital's markets stir. Millers sling stone wheels. Potters line up damp bowls. Fishmongers fan silver scales toward the breeze. Between stalls, a child recites a poem about Jimmu planting his staff beside a young camphor. Her grandmother corrects a line, then kisses her forehead. On a nearby street, a magistrate listens to two farmers argue over a bend in a ditch. He sets the mirror on a stool so both can watch their own faces as words sharpen and then soften. They leave with a plan to widen the trench together. In a workshop, warriors polish spearheads, then stack hoes for delivery to an outlying hamlet rebuilding from flood. They knot a straw charm around the bundle and laugh because the charm was tied by a stern captain whose fingers shook when he first learned it from a priestess. In a shrine courtyard, sea kings hang weathered ropes from a mast and teach schoolchildren to read tides by cloud and gull. One boy points, grinning, as the three-legged crow lands on the masthead as if to check their homework. At noon, the emperor walks the shaded side of the market lane. He wears no crown, only a travel hat and a plain sash. People bow if they notice. If they do not, it changes nothing. He stops to buy pears. The seller refuses payment until he insists. Then she accepts 1 coin and 2 words for temple. Then she accepts 1 coin and 2 words for temple. He moves on, a quiet axis around which the lane turns without strain. Dusk brings drums and the smell of grilled rice cakes. Lanterns thread the canal like a necklace of small moons. The Hall of Echoes opens its shutters. Families bring tablets, some names long, some short, some carved, some inked by clumsy child hands. A singer begins the anthem that is less a song than a posture, shoulders easing, jaws unclenched, breath arriving on time. The Emperor and Empress join the crowd at the back row. No one announces them. The mirror on the dais catches only the lanterns and the many faces. Not a single one. And then sunrise again, because that is what nations do when they remember their vow. The child with the camphor poem will grow, and one day she'll lead a flood brigade. The stern captain will teach charms to his granddaughter. The pear seller will keep a temple box heavy with small coins and big love. The emperor will age, and another will take the clay lamp and hand it forward. Dawn eternal is not a sky event. It's a human habit, the courage to keep beginning. When people keep that courage, a throne is never alone, and a nation is always mourning. Thank you for walking this road. From chaos, without form, to a nation with a heart. From storm-born swords to rituals that teach restraint. From a single emperor to a people who carry his light. Yamato, dawn of the emperor, was never just the rise of one ruler. It was the shaping of a promise that power must reflect like a mirror, bind like a chain of jewels, and restrain like a sheathed sword. If this story moved you, it's yes because you recognized it, not as myth far away, but as a rhythm in your own life, the work of beginning again, of listening before acting, of handing the lamp forward. Empires change faces, families keep faith, rivers flood, fields recover, dawn returns, and so do we. Carry this with you. Strength is not who kneels beneath you, but who stands beside you. Offer a word that mends, share a tool that builds, bow to the unseen, protect the seen. And when a new morning comes, as it always does, stand in it with open hands. The sun is rising. Let's be worthy of its light.